On today's podcast, we're going to be talking about Superman versus a very controversial group. As such, we will be issuing a viewer and listener discretion advised. That being said, let's get into the show. Okay, what is happening here?
Where are we?
Glix, give us a situation report.
Currently, we are on the planet Geekery. Be warned, our impossibility drive may cause distortions as we traverse this land. Impending impossibility engaging in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, Devoted Geeks. Welcome to Comm Talk, the podcast extension of Geek Devotions, the show from Devoted Geeks who are devoted to letting people know that they are loved. I'm Dallas, and Celeste is over helping out Glick. She had a malfunction in our last podcast, and so a little overload. Celeste is taking care of that. And our impossibility drive has messed up again, and so we're back in the Superman district for some strange reason. So I had to enlist the help of someone really awesome. That is this gentleman right here. Ladies and gentlemen, Carlos Renfroe.
Good day, folks from the Superman District. How's everyone doing?
Carlos, so thankful to have you here with us today, my man.
Great to be here, man.
Now, Carlos, you have a podcast that you're kind of rebirthing soon?
I am, and there's a lot of things that's kind of coming together for that. So we'll be returning a favor here.
Come on. Sweet. And what's the name of that podcast?
The name of the podcast, the revamped name for the podcast itself is going to be Straight Truth. It is going to be a division of Healing Truth Ministries, and there's a couple of strands and different directions that we're going to be going with that. But Straight Truth will be the new, longer podcast, along with the shorter Moments of Truth. They're like 2-minute episodes that'll be in between.
Oh, that's so cool. I love it. So I encourage you guys, we're going to have links in our description down below for you to check out Carlos's stuff. But that being said, today is a special podcast, not just because you're on here, but because this is our first time doing a video podcast.
Oh, I'm honored.
And this is also, we're doing a 3-part series.
Yep.
Thanks to you, our devoted geeks, and specifically our devoted Patreon geeks. We're going to be doing a series on this book right here, Superman Smashes the Klan, which is a really it's an interesting book.
It is. So far, it's very interesting.
And this is the reason why we said our intro. This is going to be controversial. We're going to be talking about some sensitive topics.
Cool.
And so for some of you, maybe you're real sensitive about a few things. Maybe skip this podcast or, listen to this cautiously. But we're going to be getting into some really detailed information about this book. But again, our patrons, you guys, you're the ones that paid for this. You guys are the ones that sponsored this, and so we're thankful for it. So let's get into some back history about this.
Yeah, let's do it.
This book is a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a adaptation,
right? Kind of an adaptation or a revamp of a previously released storyline,
right? So back in the 40s, the Ku Klux Klan was on the rise again. They took a big hit. And then back in the 40s, there was this resurgence of this particular group. And there was a journalist. This is what I think is cool. There was a journalist who was like,
right.
He made it his mission to like expose the Klan and say, these guys are whack. We need to get rid of them. And he got in touch with an organization that set him up with a fake identity. Like, this is some like 007 stuff.
Yeah, this is like almost, this is real life, but it's almost like a movie storyline.
Exactly.
It's something that you would expect to be in a movie storyline, but it really happened.
Like, I want this movie. I know that, what was his name? Spike Lee did a movie called The Black Klansman. That was kind of a similar, but it was a cop situation. But this is like, this was a journalist.
Yeah.
He infiltrated the Klan, worked his way up the ranks, discovering all their secrets. And this is where this is the sad part of the story for me. He went to the authorities, like the police, the FBI, and they basically gave him what we call the teenager salute.
Right.
And
yeah, that's a good description.
For those of you who don't know what that is, that's this. And if you're listening to the audio, I lifted my hands up like, I don't know. And they're like, okay, cool, whatever. So he did something really interesting. And from my understanding, there's various stories on how this happened. But somehow he was connected with a guy named Maxwell, who was in charge of the Superman radio dramas that were going on at the time.
Yes, back in the days of radio drama.
I love radio dramas.
I love it too.
What's your earliest radio drama you remember listening to?
Well, I kind of remember listening to Christian radio and Adventures in the Odyssey.
Oh, yeah.
Really and I actually had my son listen to some of those things because the radio drama kind of forces you to engage your imagination.
Absolutely.
And kind of visualize what's happening rather than TV and media doing it for you. So.
Exactly. And that very power of it, I think it was key back in the 40s. Now, Superman, the radio drama, it was one of the top ranking radio station or shows at the time.
Right.
And so Maxwell, him and this guy named Kennedy got together, and Kennedy goes, "This is what I have." And he's like, "Let's make something happen." And they created this story called Superman versus the Clan of the Fiery Cross.
Right.
Which, of course, those of us who, many years later, we understand the reference to the Fiery Cross. We were talking about the Ku Klux Klan. They would light crosses in people's yards for a variety of reasons. And so I thought it was interesting that he didn't just flat out call Superman versus the KKK.
Right.
Like, they were like, no, it's not about the KKK. Sort of.
Right.
So this is the background of the story that we've read. And we've only read book 1.
Right.
And so what we're going to do is, in this podcast, we're going to talk about, in the front end, let's talk about the art. Let's talk about the story itself. And then after our commercial break, we're going to be talking about the implications of the story and what we've read and what we've seen. So let's get into this. Let's talk about the art style and whatnot. What was your initial impact when you first got the book and you first opened up the pages? Now, you had the special edition copy.
I do.
With the nice oil paint on the front end.
Yeah,
that was pretty, man.
Right. And the oil paint copy is a contrast from what it looks like on the inside. If you show that cover there, that's really true to the form of the art on the inside of it.
And it's almost like this remember the early 2000s Superman cartoon series? It's almost that feel.
It very much is, yeah.
So I was kind of thrown off by it because I'm opening up like, this looks like it's really meant for children.
Yeah.
Which I guess to a degree kind of is.
Well, when you think about the almost bygone era of what comics were in their inceptions in the 30s and the 40s,
right?
That's really was the target audience. Now we have more more illicit characters in comics now.
Right.
And comics really aren't targeting toward kids now, so you see the artwork reflect that.
Right.
Comics now are crossing over into movies so much, so the artwork is more sophisticated, more detailed.
Right.
The anatomy is more human realistic. Superman's muscles are kind of rounded off and angular there. He doesn't look like a bodybuilder like he does in modern comics. So I thought that was really kind of true to form when you consider the era that it was originally released.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that I think people should know when they read the book. It is very much set in the 40s.
Yes.
Like when they did this, they were meticulous about capturing the original storyline, which we'll talk about that later, but it is grounded in that realm. And I appreciated the opening panels of this. You have Superman fighting this Nazi, like I forgot what his name, Toxic Avenger or something. I don't know.
He was keyed in on radiation,
right? And so he's fighting this Nazi, and you're automatically the guys who put this book together. They're like, okay, 2019 audience, we've got to frame this for them. So automatically they put us in that time frame of just post World War II.
Yeah.
The Superman, he's a little different. He has the black background on his S, which was what it was back in the 40s.
It was.
And at the same time, Lois is taking time to explain his powers.
Right.
Like, I was kind of taken back when he didn't fly. Like, he jumped up.
And that's the first thing that I noticed. It's like, and if you get this, you're going to get a Superman that's going places not by flying but by running across the power lines.
Right.
He's following the power grid like he's following the roads, and that's how he stays off the streets. By running across the power lines. And so it's very odd to see Superman not take off to arrive at where he's going.
Right. What was it like for you when you saw him respond to kryptonite but not know what it was? Like, they didn't even call it kryptonite.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, they didn't call it kryptonite, and so now it's almost like this is his first encounter.
Right.
He's describing vividly what he's feeling, and there was always a little bit of some hidden insight because you always see in the movies and in the comics, you see him respond to kryptonite in a weakening sense.
Right.
But he actually he described a symptom. He described feeling sick and things like that. You don't really, when Superman's being weakened by kryptonite, you don't really know what he's experiencing in his body in the movies. But in this one, he's kind of, he's in his little thought bubble, he's
right.
revealing exactly what the toxic effects of kryptonite are. And I thought that was very interesting. And it took me a minute just to kind of like his kryptonite, bro.
Right.
And it dawned on me, he doesn't know what this is. He doesn't know what he's experiencing.
That phrase, that's kryptonite, bro. That really was like, for those of us who've been reading like for comics forever, like we're like, dude, what are you doing? But
glowing green rock.
And I found this interesting. The radio, I didn't know this. The radio show, the radio dramas, they're the ones that introduced kryptonite.
I didn't know that.
There was no kryptonite before the radio dramas. So when they framed this, it was a new substance.
Wow. So the most OP character in the history of comics literally at that point didn't have a weakness.
Exactly. They're like, we got to make something here, guys. So I think it's interesting that you talked about earlier, kind of going back and forth, you were talking about we were talking about how it seems like for kids, that was actually a made crux for the original storylines. There was actually some blowback. People were like, well, why are we doing these radio dramas? They're not teaching kids anything. So they're like, oh, we got to make these educational somehow.
Right.
And so that's kind of like part of the whole thing when Maxwell and Kennedy got together, like, okay, we need to teach people a lesson.
Right.
And we're going to go after a very dangerous group at the same time.
Yes.
Let's go.
The most dangerous PSA ever.
16 part. Ooh. All right. So Superman's obviously very, very different. Was there anything else about the art style or the storyline in that world that kind of popped out to you that we were like, oh wow, this is really framing the 40s for you?
Well, you look at the dress,
right?
You look at the way their costume was, even the ridiculous radiation suit that the bad guy had on, and like you said, a throwback to Superman not looking like he looks on your shirt. There, to him looking more like he looked with the background on the S, but not with the gold black background on the S, and,
right.
And Lois and Jimmy being really true to the form of what a 40s reporter would look like.
Exactly.
Lois very traditional in a dress suit, So it was they really did a good job of framing it in the context of the 40s.
Right. And so, and I thought that within that, they did a great job helping you understand that by explaining things.
Right.
So this story, though, it follows not necessarily just Superman. It follows a Chinese family, immigrants, actually.
Yes.
And so let's talk about the storyline a little bit. It's following a family. They just moved into town, into Metropolis.
Right. Into the big city.
Dad's some sort of scientist.
Right.
And he gets his lab coat. Everyone's excited about it. And the little girl and her brother go off to the baseball field.
Right.
And the team just happens to be ran by Jimmy Olsen. I thought that was very serendipitous.
I thought that was interesting. Yeah. I think they just kind of needed somebody to plug into that spot, so they plugged a familiar character. They plugged Jimmy Olsen into that spot.
Exactly. And we have this interesting conflict that takes place of where there's obviously it's a young Chinese boy, but he's phenomenal. Like he's a great pitcher.
Great pitcher. Very athletic.
Very athletic. And then there's a young man who is a little big-headed.
A little on the cocky side. I mean, he's kind of the big fish in the little pond before these guys show up.
So, but I think the way that they illustrated it, like between the scripting and then the illustration, like you really get a sense of like, wow, this is really an awkward moment right now.
Right. And kind of backing up from there, you can feel the awkwardness even as the Chinese family is showing up on the scene. Mm-hmm. You have the brother and the sister kind of unsure about where they're moving to.
Right.
Even I thought what I found really interesting is in this part of the artwork as well, when the mom would talk. Yeah. She would speak Chinese. They would take her English letters and they would shade it in the pinkish red to let you know that she was speaking Mandarin.
Right.
And the father would always correct her and tell her, no, honey, speaking English.
Right.
Because he's trying to get her to assimilate to where they're moving to. And you can tell that the daughter and the mother are the least comfortable with this move. And that the guys, the father and the son, they're more comfortable with what's going on. They're kind of seeing it as a bold opportunity to jump to a next chapter. And so that kind of sets up some of these awkward interactions with the people that are already in Metropolis, and in particular with the baseball scene.
Absolutely. And speaking of that kind of background aspect, I thought it was really interesting the way they played out the scene where they're in the car and she's talking about her jacket. This like it's from the old country.
Right.
You're like, well, we're gonna get you a new one, but like she's holding on to this old, like this is what I'm familiar to.
Right.
With.
Yeah.
And of course
they're leaving Chinatown. If you don't, they're moving out of Chinatown and they're moving into Metropolis. So they're leaving an area where they're very culturally adept and familiar with their surroundings and moving to something that's literally almost a foreign country to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have this background where they feel awkward, and they're trying to figure it out. The little girl, the brother, they're at the baseball thing. She still feels kind of, antsy about it. He's loving it. He's like, I got friends. I'm playing baseball.
Right.
And
he gets to show off, too.
He shows off hard. And then, again, there was a young man who just got a little cocky, and he was crowding the plate, which, for those of you who play baseball, you know that's a mistake.
Yeah.
I crowded the plate once on accident, and only once. And my knee taught me the lesson of that.
Oh, yeah. That baseballs are hard, and it is very easily. That's a lesson you only want to learn once. I coached baseball here a couple of years, and my oldest son played in it, and we played in our first year live arm league. For those of you who have never worked or coached little league, you start out with coach pitch, where the coaches are pitching to the kids.
Oh wow!
And then there's this transition phase, where we were coaching. It's called live arm, and it's their first year when the players themselves are pitching to each other.
Right.
And my oldest son, he's a poor guy. He's the only left-handed batter on the team, and those guys do not know how to throw across the plate with left-handed. So about 50% of his on bases were him getting hit with the ball.
Ooh, poor guy.
Yep.
Well, that's what we have happen in the book is because he's crowding the plate, he gets binged, and he goes after the kid. And he's like accusing him of doing it on purpose. And of course, Jimmy's like, you were being dumb. This is on you. You crowded the plate, and you're being an idiot. And ends up kicking the kid off the team.
Yeah, and his sister jumps in and stands up for him. And that's kind of where you get the first twinges of the racial epithets there, as they're letting them know in their language that they don't belong with them and where they are on the team. That this cocky kid here, that he's letting them know that your kind doesn't belong here, and that you're here to take my place. And he's felt threatened, and he felt threatened not just because the kid was a better baseball player than him, but because the kid was Chinese. Right.
So we fast forward a little bit. There's some altercations. The young boy he goes home, and he has a relative come out who is
his uncle.
Yep. And his uncle is like, "What's wrong with you?" And at first he's all like, "Hey, walk it off, be a man." But then you have the awkwardness of when he goes, "So who was it?" And he goes, "This kid named Lee." And all of a sudden, he just goes off the rails.
Right. He lights up once he realizes it. I think he threw out a couple of names that would be, your common American names. As soon as he throws out Lee, then the mood changes, to say the least.
And I think even like the way they animated that scene the way they drew out those panels, you saw the switch off. Like he already looked kind of erratic. Right. But when he went to the whole like, it's who?
Yeah, he got the weird, crazy outlook.
Like the artists, they did a great job. Again, this is a very childlike art style. Right. I say childlike. It's for younger audiences, but it really does exist the transformation in an individual.
Yeah, it does. It does. You saw him turn from a neutral character to an antagonist in the panels, and I thought that was actually a pretty nice touch.
Right. So they go off. He takes his nephew with him to ultimately what is a Klan rally, and introduces him to the rest of the Klan. And this is where the story gets really, really dark. Yeah. And they end up at the front yard of the Lees and do a
cross burning.
Cross burning.
Yes.
And they say it's a warning, but at the same time, it's like the uncle hands the boy a what's it called, a Molotov cocktail, what do we call it? Yeah. And he goes, "Here, chunk this." And the kid doesn't throw it very well. Right. And I couldn't really tell the story if it was he didn't throw well, or if it was he didn't feel right about it.
It felt more like a hesitation, like he was along for the ride, but he didn't. Even the kid showing up and following his uncle to this cross burning with the rest of the Klan. They all have on the hoods and the robes and everything. Right. And it's like he didn't expect it to get that real. Right. To where now there's somebody in danger. Exactly. Now I'm expected to act out in a violent way. And I think he realized at that moment he kind of gotten in a little bit more than what he bargained for. He fell in over his head. I mean, the kid's supposed to be a pitcher, and he couldn't throw the bottle.
Exactly. And so you had this awkwardness take place, and I keep saying awkwardness, but you have this. It feels awkward. It does. You have a kid, and he's like, "I don't want to do this," and then you have them kind of fighting it, and then you see that the little girl recognizes the boy because he's wearing these red boots for some reason.
Yeah, he's wearing the same ones that he had on earlier when he was when she had seen him before.
Exactly, and so they run off, and again, the story really, the uncle really becomes more erratic, in my opinion, throughout the story.
He does.
He becomes more, it's a scary individual. And you could tell that the boy didn't really feel comfortable with it.
Right. Well, and the uncle now is in control mode.
Right.
He's in the mode where now it's time to make you like me, and you're gonna have to get past your intrepidation if you want to see clearly what we're trying to do here. Right.
So, which is a scary situation.
Yeah.
For anybody to be in.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it would be confusing even for a fictional character.
Right. So they do something again, just terrifying. They actually kidnap the boy.
Yeah.
They're walking home. Lee and his sister are walking home. And they separate because they have a little tiff, and these guys roll up and they kidnap Lee. And they run off with him, and I can't imagine what the little girl had to feel.
Right,
like that when they played out the panels where she was like, "Where's Lee?"
Right,
and she's freaking out.
Right,
I think they did a great job illustrating the fear of that.
Right. Because you have a bit of an undercurrent, and there's conflict between her and her brother because he's egging on her for always being reserved and kind of holding back and not wanting to adjust to the change.
Right.
And she's kind of in conflict with him because she feels like the change for him is self-serving, that he gets an opportunity to show off and kind of grandstand a little bit. So there's this back and forth between the old and the new between the two of them.
Right.
And so he gets her upset and she walks off and cries. And I guess that's something that he's used to her doing. She gets upset. She goes off and she cries. And so they split. And when they split, he's approached in the car and while he's walking home, and they kidnap him and they take him with him.
Right. And so then, of course, she's on this journey, and she automatically knows. She seems to know off the bat, I know who did this.
Right, something's not right.
Right, and she goes to Jimmy Olsen, who I think it's interesting that she automatically has this connection to Jimmy. She's like, he's the guy in charge of the baseball team. I need to go to him. And, of course, Clark overhears it.
Right.
And he Superman's out.
Clark overhears everything.
Everything. And so it actually ends at a very interesting point where...
Right. It's a bit of a cliffhanger.
It is a cliffhanger. And I'm really anxious to read book 2 of this.
Right.
And so overall, as a story, has it captured your attention? Like, do you want to read book 2?
Yeah, I want to read book 2 for a variety of reasons. One, you want to see what happens. You want to see how far they get with the young man, with young Lee. You want to see there's still some revelation to go on with what's going on with the Klan in Metropolis, because there are even people that are surprised at the cross burnings, like, hey man, this is Metropolis.
Exactly.
Why is this happening here in the city?
Right.
That's something that happens out there, out yonder. Right. And so there's something to be revealed there. I'm also very interested in the young boy, whose uncle is a Klansman, is the Klan leader. I'm interested to see how far he's willing to go. I'm very interested to see if these events are scaring him enough to back off, and maybe he's a bit of a dynamic character that's redeemable from being a belligerent racist, or maybe an edge character that's almost in that arena and it pulls him back, right? Or does something happen that kind of pushes him into fully investing in it? Absolutely. I'm interested to see how this affects the relationship between the brother and the sister. Yeah, how that affects even the parents. Yeah, even the parents. How does that affect their thoughts of what's going on with them moving from Chinatown, leaving the familiar, and moving into Metropolis, and now they have all these problems? Exactly. There's definitely a lot of really great small story points that I want them to wrap up, like the ones you just said. Right. Where they've got, because they, in the story itself, they did a great job of going, okay, here's this, here's that, here's this, here's this. The parents in there moving to Metropolis, the dad taking on this new job, dealing with his new boss, one boss that loves him, and a fellow employee who is pretty much against him. Right. Yep. So you have all these small things here and there, and at the same time, we have this. We haven't talked about it very much, ironically. Superman's having some problems. Yeah, he's having some issues, and this is very different if you're used to a smash 'em up, bang 'em up comic. Yes. Because I think kind of one thing that they did at the beginning with the radioactive guy trying to break the dam there in Metropolis, and Superman getting to kick a little bit of butt, is that Superman hasn't engaged anybody much as his super self. He's not showing off his array of powers and abilities and skills. And in this storyline, he's not fighting some supervillain that's threatening the city. He's really fighting an ideology.
Exactly.
So Superman engaging people with his fist and with his superpower and his heat vision and all that stuff, you know, is not really prevalent.
Right. And that's, but like, and I'm curious to what they're doing with it, because in the book, he's having these weird visions where he's seeing aliens, like not just like I'm an alien, but like we're talking like ET phone home aliens.
He's having some flashbacks from some things that were communicated, and that's kind of where you got a little bit of a double storyline going on, because we have these immigrants that have come in to Metropolis from Chinatown, and they're mixing into and assimilating into a culture that they're not familiar with and frankly not comfortable with. And you have Superman going back to his memory of him realizing that he's different. Right. And he has a flashback from where he's protecting a friend of his, and the heat vision comes out for the first time, and you know, and he's feeling like the immigrant, like the alien. Right. You know, he's feeling like the one that's different, and all of this is kind of cross-culturing with what Superman is going through, literally not being from the planet.
Exactly. And even at the same time, like when those panels when he's a kid, he's scared of it. Yeah. Like he's reading a book about these aliens shooting laser beams, and all of a sudden he's doing it. Yeah. And it scares him.
And his friend is afraid of him because he's protecting his friend. His friend's like, get away from me. He's thinking, man, you're one of those crazy monsters out of the comics. Right. So absolutely. And I think it may be advanced spoiler. I think the setup for Superman weakening is important. I may be wrong. The later episodes may prove me wrong with this, but I think him being weakened is a setup from him having to rely on something other than his super strength.
I agree. I really think so. All right. So what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the bigger themes of it, our thoughts on it as far those themes, what's pulling out about racism and other aspects, and some of our we were talking about, we had some trepidation going into this and what those were. So we'll see you guys after this break.
Hi, I'm Francisco from the Retro Rewind podcast, and as always, I'm joined by...
I'm Paul J. Powers, and they call me the Master Interrupter.
Yeah, I wonder why.
It doesn't matter, because you're listening to Comm Talk.
Comms returning to normal stasis in 3, 2, 1.
All right, and we're back. I want to encourage you guys, please go check out Retro Rewind Podcast. They're great friends of ours. Francisco and Paul they're always fun to hang out with. Yeah. And speaking of which, I just hung out with them, actually. Got to talk with them about Batman Returns.
Sweet.
And
we've done Batman Returns before.
We did, didn't we?
You and I had a good go around with Batman Returns.
That was a good conversation.
It was.
So, and I want to encourage you guys, check out that podcast episode. Yes. Speaking of I didn't even put that together, actually, when I was planning to do this. Yeah. But you and I talked about Batman Returns.
We sure did.
Geekmas a couple of years ago. Yes. So we'll link to that conversation in the description of this episode.
As a matter of fact, in the Facebook group, I put in the comment my favorite Christmas movie, and that was a reference to the conversation you and I had. You got to go check it out and see what that was all about.
Oh yeah, that was a great conversation. But I was just on Retro. We talked about Batman Returns. We were talking about whether or not it was a classic film, a nostalgic film, or a tragic film.
Wow.
And we rated it as, well, you have to go listen to it. I'm not going to spoil it.
No spoilers here. I don't even get out to it. No spoilers here.
But it's a lot of fun. And real quick plug for them, if you're a patron, we had a really great conversation that you can only access if you're one of their patrons or one of their Twitch circuits, which are people who use their Amazon Prime to subscribe to their Twitch channel. You get access to their, what they call it? They used to call it bonus rounds. Celeste is off screen. Celeste, what do they call the extra stuff for the patrons? I forgot what they call it now. My brain stopped, so I apologize, Francisco. We'll have to look at it later, but they put out in their extra stuff for patrons, we have a spiritual speculation conversation.
Sweet.
And we had a really great conversation. So those of you guys who, you're looking for a podcast to support, check them out.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if you would like to support our show, again, this whole episode is sponsored by our patrons. 100%. They're the ones that said, hey, because we asked them about it. They're like, yeah, do this episode, do this series and review these and have this real life conversation, because there's some major topics here.
There are.
That They're important. I'm going to rate this right now as one of the most important series we've done with Geek Devotions. And I'm glad to have you here with us.
I'm glad to be here.
But if you guys want to help see more content like this and you want to help support us doing that, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Geek Devotions. Link in the description down below. Also, links off our website, geekdevotions.com, where you can do Patreon or a one-time gift through PayPal.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Doesn't get much easier than that.
So speaking of, now we got all that out of the way, let's get into the heavier topics of this. Not that this hasn't already been heavy.
Yeah.
This has been really heavy. This at its core, like we said earlier, this was the original radio drama was a direct attack on the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
The KKK.
As it was growing in the height of its powers.
Exactly. And you and I, when I brought this to you, I had some weariness about this, and I think you had the same worries I had. What were some of your concerns about us doing this series?
Well, of course, you're going to be touching on not just a hot topic or a controversial topic as it comes to historical evils, but where we kind of are in society today. Right. It's going to be touching on some of those things too, and you know, in places like this, we don't try to get overly political,
right?
But in ways that you're gonna have a hard time avoiding stuff like that.
Exactly.
But I think they did a pretty good job so far. I don't know how far the story is going to go, but so far they've done a pretty good job at thwarting my main concern.
Right.
My main concern was that they were going to take this 40s storyline in 2019 it too much, and they were going to interject the modern divisions that are around here culturally and try to make a broader point about something today rather than recapping the storyline. Right. Now, in short, I was afraid they were going to start trying to make it a little extra woke, which happens with a lot of print media and film and movies and a lot of different stuff and YouTube channels. And I didn't want that to get in the way of them telling the story that was originally told in the radio series in the 40s.
Yeah, I was very much in the same boat as you. Excuse me for a second, I got a cough. Excuse me, guys. I'm finding something here with this recently. Maybe it's I need a whammy.
Yeah, that's what it is.
But I was kind of in the same boat with you. I was actually really weary about this. Right after I got you the book, like I picked up the copies, I gave it to you. DC put out a post somewhere with Superman carrying a whole bunch of kids, and it said that Superman cares about immigrants too. Right. And that if you're in America, if you're listening to this, because we do have some international audience, we have people in Australia and other places listening to this podcast. Immigration is a hot topic right now.
It is a very hot topic.
It is a huge topic right now, and so I was actually worried that they were going to try to do this.
Right.
Now that being said, I took some time to listen to a portion of the original radio drama. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, it's hard to listen to. For me as an individual, I don't do racism very well at all. Like
that's what you should.
But like it bothers me. I get angry.
Right.
Like I Celeste will testify. I get really frustrated and angry at certain
still
things.
movies that I won't watch because I don't need the tensions rising.
Absolutely. I tried watching Crash. Did you ever watch that?
I haven't.
That movie is interesting because instead of it just being a one direction of racism, it's a ring of racism. Right. And so you have racism between like a white guy and an African American and Chinese and the Mexicans, and you have this just big loop of things. And I get the film was trying to point out the fact that there's racism across the board.
Right.
I couldn't get through the first 15 minutes of it.
Right.
Like I was just angry. And so again, there's certain hot topics, racism, child abuse, abusing women. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
And so listening to the drama, even though this was a radio drama that was designed to teach children, for me, it was hard to listen to. That being said, I've listened probably maybe 15, 20 minutes of the first of it. And again, this is 16 parts. I will say that this book has been very on point and accurate to the original story.
Right.
They've added a few things.
Right.
And I think they added it for just modern audience to be able to follow along.
Right, yeah.
Lois's interjections about Superman's only been able to jump so far.
Right.
And, Superman runs along the power line, so he doesn't travel the road. That was explanation for us,
right,
2019, who don't have that Superman.
Right, yeah.
That was the Superman in the 40s.
Word.
The little girl, just the focus on her, that's been added.
Right.
But again, I think that's a plot device.
Right. A plot device and a little bit more of a modernization. You wouldn't expect in 1940s for them to focus on a little Chinese girl as a main character.
Exactly. So they haven't done to date. They haven't done the, as you put it, the extra woke mindset things.
Right. They haven't 2019 much at all.
Right.
As of yet, this has to be yet to be seen if they're going to try to use that as a setup to maybe take a few shots at some political ideologies that they don't agree with, or they're just going to tell the story.
Exactly.
We'll have to wait and see.
Right. Now, we may do a podcast later where we actually just review the actual thing in comparison of the drama and everything, but talking about the book, let's talk about again, this is based in the 40s.
Right.
We have to keep that in mind, but it does speak to people today. So let's say that your son, how old is he now?
He is 14. My oldest is 14. My youngest is 9.
So your 14-year-old walks into your office and goes, "Hey, Dad, what's that book?" And you tell him, "Oh, it's Superman Smashes the Klan." And he reads it.
Yeah, we actually had a conversation about it. He hadn't read it, but we had a conversation
about
it. And we talked about this.
So what's that conversation look like then? Like when you hand it to him, you go, "Hey, this is a interesting story." How do you explain this to him?
Well, from a perspective of explaining it to him, I would explain it to him as a device of where we were, of where America was at that time, that there were people on both sides of this thing. And we have to be careful when we look back at kind of the black eyes in America, in America's past, that we have to remember that this isn't representative of an entire group or an entire nation of people.
Right.
Even where I came from in the South, it wasn't representative of an entire demographic.
Right.
So just as a tool, as the device to say this is an adaptation of a fictional storyline that kind of gives the temperature of where we were at this time. Right. And these type of things did happen in real life, even though this is a fictional account. These are characters that are made up. That is the backdrop of this comes from a real time in the period in our history. Right. And it used that as a way to teach lessons and to draw some contrast and gain perspective on where we are now.
Right. So you as an African American, you've picked it up as an adult man. You've grown. You've lived through quite a bit. You've served our country, and I've heard stories about things that are said behind closed doors while people are in the service of our country. And and you grew up in Georgia, which again has a history of certain things. Right. What was it like for you reading this book?
Well, I was kind of brought back to like you said, a lot of this stuff, man, is growth, evolution, a maturation process as you change. I remember, hearing things about real racism, what I call real racism. I'll throw a disclaimer out there. My threshold for what constitutes racism might be a little higher than what other people's threshold constitutes racism. Really? And it's because of what I grew up with. It's because I grew up in areas where I did see legitimate discrimination based simply off of the color of the skin, not just competing ideologies. I disagree with you, but real racism based on the color of skin. Right. I've seen that, not to a large degree like my parents did. My parents grew up in segregated schools. Right. I remember my mom talking to me about when they integrated schools. My dad talking to me about when they integrated schools. Wow. I remember all the stories my grandparents used to tell me about the difference between whites and blacks and things. And my mom talking about walking home from school when kids were throwing rocks out of the school buses at them, when they were walking and the white kids were on the bus throwing rocks at them, and calling them names and things like that. I remember being 5 or 6 years old and going through a town square of a city, and there was an assimilation of the Klan. They weren't wearing the hoods and the robes, but they were passing out the literature in the center of the town square, and they were stopping people who were at traffic stop. They even handed my mom and her sister pamphlet. My sister I'm in the back seat. Wow. And I remember pulling to the stop sign because it's a very small town. There's no stoplights there. Right. And at the stop sign there, my mom like, what's going on? And my mom's sister, my aunt, was like, hey, that's the Klan. Now, and when you hear that, immediately you think about the pictures and the videos that you see of cross burnings and even more subversive, lynchings and things like that, because you've seen pictures and images like that
Right.
growing up in the South. And I remember me and my sister kind of in the back seat, kind of shrinking up, not knowing what to expect. They were handing out their pamphlets and stuff like that. But my aunt was driving the car. She just kind of took it and just kind of went on about their business. So when I talk about racism, I think of stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't think of some of the things that some people consider racism now. That's just not the way I think.
Sure.
So just in the context of that and looking at what was going on,
Mm-hmm.
it really drew a contrast in where this nation is being and really where we are now, because of things that were overtly being said and done in the comic. I mean, even though people can say that they're twinges of racism that were not post-racial, we couldn't come in the neighborhood of getting away with what these guys are doing there then. I mean, I couldn't imagine in a metropolitan area anybody being bold enough to show up in somebody's front yard and burning a cross.
No, not at all.
I couldn't imagine that. And it really brings reality that these things weren't, these things were true. They're real. People lived through this, and people had to work through the thing. Just like in the comic there, the inspector or the detective there was a black man on the police department that showed up there to investigate what was going on. That in that time in the 40s, that even in and I'm assuming Metropolis is kind of like a Manhattan, a little bit like a Manhattan.
It feels like that in the comics.
So we wouldn't be in the 1940 Jim Crow era,
right?
So you got a guy who's a police detective in a major metropolitan city, but he's black. If this is taking place in the South, he obviously wouldn't be there. You know,
but he did mention that, and that when the event happened at the Lees and they had the cross burning there, his friends were like, they came to help. And the Lees at first were like, nope, we want to handle this on our own, which I think is indicative of the time period where like people were ashamed, like, look, we just want to do our thing. We just want to live our life. We don't want all this attention, which is a kind of an aspect of Chinese culture in and of itself. But I appreciate that the police detective, he was like, I've been through this.
Right.
Like he's like, I've experienced this. I'm not leaving you alone.
Right.
And so I appreciated that mindset.
Yeah. And one thing I did appreciate, and also maybe they didn't trust the black people yet either.
Yeah.
There was more than just black and white in that time, just like there's more than just black and white now. And one thing I can appreciate also, which leads me to have some sort of a hope for where we're going with this, is that they didn't try to paint excuse me, they didn't try to paint all of the white people as evil people, because they made a distinction between the Klansmen and those that followed the ideology, and they did a pretty good job of drawing a line between guys like Jimmy and Lois, even though Superman is technically not white, he's an alien,
right?
Drawing a line between them and their sympathizing with, hey, this is wrong,
right?
Or them saying, hey, I can't believe this is happening in Metropolis, that people are acting like this in Metropolis, that they didn't go the direction of white man equal bad,
right?
And I'm glad they didn't go in that direction.
Absolutely. So again, going into the book, we had some trepidation, but we realized they're keeping real chill to the story. They're keeping real close to the story.
Yeah, pretty much.
And we've kind of talked about you as a African American in 2019, how you would interpret, how you pass this on to your son, goes, hey, this is a story, and trying to explain that. But how do you think that we explain this to the greater audience, past the African American community, past you're talking to your son, who you're having to explain to? Because to be honest, your son hasn't grown up in that.
No, not even close. He hadn't even grown up what I grew up with.
Right. And to me, that's I am so thankful for that.
And to me, that's a sign of progress.
Exactly. We are so past that moment. When I was reading the panels, I was thinking, I haven't seen any of this stuff before.
Right.
And at first I had checked myself, okay, have I not seen this because I'm Caucasian? Because I grew up in mostly, Caucasian areas? And I realized it's because we just haven't seen this stuff. Right. Like, this is next level, man.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. To that degree. And sometimes it takes a bit of comparison of where you were to see where you are.
Right.
Sometimes, drawing that comparison, it can be a thing where it can upset you. Mm-hmm. It can, get the blood boiling a little bit, but it can provide an opportunity for there to be perspective.
Right.
And my son growing up in this area is we're in the South, but we're kind of in a military vibe. So there's a lot of different cultures in here.
Right.
And this isn't something that's even remotely a concern for him in his day-to-day life, to the point where I have to make it a point to teach him that, hey, this exists, that there are people that think like this, and just kind of bring balance to some imbalance that he may see in social media and TV and in the movies and things like that. Just kind of bring a balance to that, because there are so many sides, different things, and there are people doing stuff out of whack on all kinds of sides. So just using that as an opportunity, though he has an experience, to be able to understand the kind of the full scope of it. Right.
I'll say this, because you mentioned our area. I've said this many times. Our area has something very beautiful that I think that if they recognized it, this city could be one of the greatest cities in the nation, because we have such a mix of cultures here.
We really do.
We have this thing where we, like, I was explaining to somebody years ago. I was funny story. I was at a church in Texas, and I was talking to this pastor, and I was explaining to him Shreveport. I said, man, it's a really interesting city, because I can be driving down the street. At one point, I'm in, kind of middle class area, and then all of a sudden, one street over, I'm in the hood. One street over, I'm in this massive ritzy neighborhood area. And he looked at me and goes, I don't believe you. I'm like, excuse me? because I've been to Shreveport. It was a country town. I'm like, that's the next street over, man.
Yeah, like, you didn't drive far enough. You took a right turn. You should have kept straight. You would have ran into the $1 million historical houses.
Exactly. I mean, it's just, we have this blend of cultures here.
There really is.
And I think that if the people in our city recognize that, if they went, oh wow, we have something that not a lot of people have. I think, and we just kind of threw out the preconceived ideas of stuff and work together.
I think one thing we need to teach people, and one place we need to be in our culture, if we want to see growth, we need to teach people that it's okay to cross healthy lines. That it's okay to step over into that person's world, and I know there's this big thing about cultural appropriation, but just being frank and being honest, if we maintain that type of mentality, we'll keep division at its core, and it'll stay the way that it is. We need to teach people that it's okay to cross lines in a friendly and in a thoughtful and in a loving way, to know where a person is, to know where their culture is, to know where they came from, to know what they value, what they hold. And I think we'll realize there's a lot more common ground than we think if we're able to do that. Right. Because producing unity never comes out of perpetuating division. It never happens that way.
Exactly. And ironically, this is coming from a black man who's named after a Mexican.
Yeah, named after a Mexican. My dad had a friend named Carlos, and he thought that was a cool name. He was a dude who was black and Mexican, and that's how I landed my name.
Exactly. But I think the book illustrates a little bit what you're talking about, because at least in this first chapters, you have a little bit of them trying to understand each other's cultures, trying to understand what's going on. Yeah. And I think that we see a little bit of play. I hope they play that out more. Right. Because that is such an essential key to us being healthy and growing together, is understanding your background. Right. Understanding how people see things, how they interpret things. We can't help people unless we understand people.
That's true. And we can't assume that someone is somewhere because of our knowledge of where we think they are. It has to come out of us truly understanding that person. I can't look at you and say, well, Dallas grew up wherever he is, and he grew up with this type of family or this type of background or whatever, or just take a glance and say, well, he ought to be like this, or he ought to think like this, or this ought to be his ideology, based off of something that I can see in a glance, or what I like to call thin slicing. Right. Just kind of taking a little off the top and then making you have to take a concerted effort to connect with people, know where they are, and then rather than judging, learning.
Right. And that takes relationship.
It does.
It takes us being uncomfortable. Yeah. And being out of our skin and go, hey, let's hang out and do life and talk and let each other know that we're loved and loved through some stuff.
And be ready to understand where somebody is and where they come. Be ready to potentially be offended and not lose your mind.
Exactly. And be ready to misunderstand. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what the problem is. We misunderstand and we get offended by it. Right. And it's like, well, what you say doesn't really add up to the way I see things.
Right.
Let's work through this together. It's not necessarily a one-to-one.
Right. There has to be a willingness there.
Yeah, but it's not a one-to-one relationship I'm about to make here. But I heard a story years ago about there was this guy who was out preaching, and he was from like New Zealand or Australia, and he was explaining how they had these meetings and they were praying for hours or doing all this other stuff. And he goes, and everyone was just naked by the end of it, and everyone in the room's like, "What? What did you just say?" Well, where he comes from, that's slang for they were tired and exhausted.
Right.
And so we have that in our cultures. I mean, obviously that's an extreme,
right.
But there is a matter of like,
right.
Okay, can you explain what you mean by this?
Yeah.
Like, why are you doing this?
Right. Yeah. There are things to me. One thing to one person is something completely different to another person.
Right.
And we have to be willing, patient, and just plain on not lazy enough to care enough to engage someone else to really grasp that understanding.
Exactly.
And just realizing that hating people because of where they come from, because of their background, what they look like, is just plain stupid.
Exactly.
It is what it is. And I think that's what they're trying to paint that with the way that they're creating the characters, the Klansmen and the young boy who's kind of caught in the middle of all of that,
right.
is they're making sure up front that they're painting their ideas and their ideology is just plain stupid.
Exactly.
And we can build on that.
Right. Now, I did a little bit in the back of the book there of our books that we have. There's some writings from the guy that kind of spearheaded this project. Did you get a chance to read that?
I did.
I thought it was interesting because some of this is a passion of his because he was a Chinese immigrant.
Yes, it was.
And
he's very close to the story.
He had, not to the extremes of this, but he had some of this happen to him, some of this racism and everything.
Right.
And I appreciate the fact that he's willing to tell a story, but not necessarily push an agenda. But it's very real for him. And
I actually think it's pretty cool that it came from a Chinese guy.
Exactly.
Because a lot of times we take our ideals of racial tension and our racial injustices and racism and paint them only in black and white. There's a whole spectrum of this stuff out here,
right? And
it's not an easy minefield to navigate sometimes. And I kind of appreciate the fact that they take it from an Asian perspective,
right? Absolutely. So what's your big takeaway from this first book? What is like if I were to go, Carlos, I need you to do an episode of Geek Devotions. What's your big takeaway from book one?
Well, big takeaway is that people are willing to go to various lengths and distances to protect what they feel is important to them. And sometimes what you feel is important to you is stupid. I don't know if I can say that enough. And the Klansmen are going to very, very extreme measures to the point of felony level crimes,
right?
To protect what they think is an ideology of, they think they're protecting America. They're just engaging in white supremacy,
right?
Also the depth of the fear that's in the Asian culture, in some ways, in the 40s, rightly so. But they're the ladies in there, and they're trying to protect what they feel is important,
right?
And that's kind of the lifting point of that. Is
right.
Everybody's kind of in their camp,
right?
And they're in their area, and they're trying to protect their turf,
right? And it's not saying that you shouldn't be protective or even honoring of your cultural past and where you come from.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when it becomes your idol,
right,
and it becomes it's so different, I'm not going to allow anything else in my life,
right, and
you get violent, that's where it gets bad,
right. That's when you start having some real crazy, unhealthy stuff. I am very proud of the family and the people and that I come from, and the people that have done things so that I have opportunities that I have now. I want to be able to provide that for my children, for my family. But it all has perspective when you look at that. If it's not about something bigger than this yourself, it will become selfish. It will become, like you say, it will become idolatrous, and you'll find yourself protecting it for the sake of that ideology in and of itself.
Right.
You'll lose perspective.
Exactly.
You'll lose sight of what the other person is and what the other person's going through and where they came from. That they have just as much behind them as you do.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I thought this was a great conversation.
I think it was too.
This
I
is
think it's a
pretty
good list. I like this.
So I should be getting book 2 pretty soon.
Yes.
I'll get that to you. And then what we're going to do is here in the next podcast, I'm not sure what the topic will be, but the podcast after that will be on book 2 of this. And so we hope you guys enjoy this. I want to encourage you guys, leave some comments and let us know your thoughts on this. If this is on YouTube still, put it on, leave comments on YouTube.
Hopefully so.
Hopefully so. Thank you, Kappa, for making us all sweat right now. If you're watching this on Facebook, leave comments on Facebook. Again, this has been a really neat experiment for me, doing a video version of this. And so thank you for being part of this.
Love it, man. Love it, bro.
I'm not going to lie. This needed to be done in video form. And if you're listening to this, the audio only, you're missing out on a key aspect of this, because what we have here is you have a white dude and a black dude sitting down talking about some real life stuff.
Right.
And I needed you guys to see this.
Yeah.
Because this can be such a one-sided conversation.
Yeah, it can.
And so, so thank you. Thank you for being part of this, man.
Hey, love it, man.
And thank you, Devoted Patron and Geeks, for sponsoring this episode. Thank you, Devoted Geeks, for listening and sharing this out. If nothing else, share this episode out. I said this earlier. This is probably, I'm going to pin this as one of the most important series that we've done on Geek Devotions, and specifically our podcast, Comm Talk. So share this out, because there's some really some big things here. I want to encourage you guys to check out all of our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just look for Geek Devotions. And Carlos, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me once I get everything spun back up the way we want to. You can still find our information. You can still find our you can still find our blogs, healingtruthministries.org. You can find us on Twitter at healingtruth.org. Same handle on Instagram at healingtruth. At Healing Truth Org. You can find us there on Twitter and Instagram. We post frequently as much as we can, and it's going to ramp up. It's going to get even better. We got new stuff coming in, new equipment coming in.
Word.
New stuff for Dallas to do as my unofficial voice guy. We got all that stuff coming in, and we're looking to. We learned so much. If you look for us on Podbean, Healing Truth Ministry, look for us there on any of your podcast platforms. We learned so much from our first go around here. We're looking to do something. If you listen to the original stuff, and what we're going to go into, it's going to be different, but it's going to be different in a very good way.
That's awesome. Do you have a potential ETA when this is going to happen?
I'm shooting at the beginning of the year, just depending on how things fall into place. I got a few things up in the air,
right?
Just depending on how it falls into place. But I'm thinking we were looking for a beginning of the year launch off for the new stuff.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to hearing more from you, and we'll keep you guys updated about this. I want to remind you guys one last thing. We have a competition happening in Devoted Geek Life right after Thanksgiving.
Yep.
Are you a cook?
It depends on what area, what arena. There are certain things that I fancy myself as pretty good at. Right. Certain things that I just don't touch.
Well, are you familiar with the Iron Chef competition?
I am.
I love the Iron Chef competition. I grew up watching that, like the original Japanese one.
Yeah.
I mean, he was like,
that was intimidating.
Those were the best. They were so much better than the American series.
Yes.
But we're doing the Iron Geek Chef competition in Devoted Geek Life, and what it is the week after Thanksgiving, we're challenging you guys to create a brand new dish using your Thanksgiving leftovers. The official rules are on our Devoted Geek Life page. So go to facebook.com and search for Devoted Geek Life. Join a group, answer the questions. That's important. You have to answer the questions. And we'll have a competition. You got to upload a video of yourself making the dish. Have fun with it. Make it geeky. And but you got to, here's the key. This is what I love about it. You have to feed somebody.
Right.
You have to give them the food.
Right. So you can't put something together that's so bad that nobody can eat it.
It's part of it.
Yes.
So, and we'll be checking the obituaries also to see if the person died.
Exactly. High stakes here.
It is, man. So, guys, thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. Just a favor, leave a review on whatever platform you're on, actually. Yep. And until next time, remember, stay devoted. You finish this off.
Peace and love.